Russian forces look to be stalled out in their efforts to take Vovchansk. But is the advantage still in Russia's favor thanks to Western policymakers? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so looking at the control map, there on the frontline map, there's no updates. I looked on X. There's no like geolocated footage of Russia occupying any kind of new towns. Just the smattering of small little hamlets around the Russia-Ukraine border, where fighting has kind of continued. And you can see Russian forces again continuing to launch a series of attacks across this kind of front line here, really between the Donetsk River and this reservoir river system here. But what's interesting, at least to me, is that the primary Russian target is the only town of any sort of real size here, and that's Vovchansk. And Vovchansk is interesting because, one, it has become pretty obvious that this is the main thrust of the Russian effort, and seizing this town is kind of essential to Russia's operational objectives. But they can't seem to do it, right? You see, it would grant them access to this highway here, this T-2104. But the problem, if you want to call it that, for Russia is that seizing Vovchansk, I think they may use it as a logistics hub or a fire base to kind of provide cover to operations maybe in this larger area, but it doesn't move them towards Kharkiv. In fact, this T-2104 highway, in some ways, it runs almost parallel with Kharkiv, right? It's not going to bring them much closer, and it's going to put an increasingly large and impassable obstacle between them in the form of the Donetsk River. So for Russian forces, if their goal is Kharkiv, they have to take Lipsy. And this is where their offensive seems even more stalled out, right? We haven't seen any evidence that they've seized Hyoboka or Lukyansky. And with more and more Ukrainian reinforcements coming into the area, it seems increasingly unlikely that they're going to pull it off. Given the fact that, as we've talked about, Russia doesn't seem to be deploying its largest armored forces in this fighting. And so you have these groups of infantry that are kind of seizing territory, and it certainly looks good for them. But when you peel back the layers, you realize this actually isn't all that dramatic a turn of events. Now, before we start peeling back those layers, of course, I got to shout out Strike Gum. You know Strike Gum, 90 milligrams caffeine in every piece, 100 milligrams of alpha GPC, further cognitive enhancement. If you need the boost of an energy drink, but you don't want to go to a gas station and drop $4.50 on it, right? Instead, you can, for basically the same price, get a pack of Strike Gum, which has the equivalent of 5 energy drinks. So if you bought a tray, which you can get on Amazon, you would get the equivalent of like 75 energy drinks. Works out to like 98 cents a piece, right? So, compare that to the same caffeine in your $5 Starbucks coffee or your $4.50 Red Bull. It's a no-brainer. Plus, now we actually have a 5-pack. Literally, the 5-pack is so new that we haven't even had the professional photos taken. But if you're like, hey, the tray is a little expensive, but it seems silly to buy just a single pack of gum and have it shipped. The tray is that sweet spot. It'll let you try Strike Gum and get a really and still have it feel worthwhile to do the shipping. So check it out, strikegum.com. But we're also on Amazon. So go to Amazon, search for Strike Gum, and you can pick it up there as well. Now, let's peel back some layers, shall we? Okay, first off, the Russian efforts to seize Vovchansk, as ISW points out, is because of a Western policy that says that Ukrainian forces can't use Western-provided systems to strike targets within Russia. And Russia realized they can exploit this, similar to how the North Vietnamese exploited the U.S.'s unwillingness to conduct operations in places like Cambodia, right? Or the fact that the U.S. kind of did half measures in Cambodia meant that they could use the places like the Ho Chi Minh Trail in order to basically establish their entire logistics system. And I say these things because it's really important to understand that in war, as von Clausewitz said, war is politics by other means. And this is true, right? These political lines are oftentimes, they're administrative boundaries. Sometimes they kind of align with existing water or river formations, but they represent places where laws and policies change, and militaries exploit this. Again, the U.S. would have sent boots on the ground, regiments, brigades, battalions into any city in Vietnam, but they were unwilling to do so in places like Laos and Cambodia. The Vietnamese exploited this weakness. Similarly, in Afghanistan, I can tell you, I was stationed, I could show you guys, I was stationed in Nangarhar province, right here. Actually, we were in Nazian district is where we operated primarily, but we also operated quite a bit in Achin here. But one of the unsolvable problems that we had to deal with was the fact that this region here was a major transit point for smugglers. And we struggled because the Taliban and associated insurgent forces would remain in Pakistan, basically preparing for operations. They would only cross the border when they wanted to engage U.S. forces. And so we could not get the drop on them. We could not surprise them. We could not catch them unprepared because they only crossed the border when they were ready to fight. And it made, this is like fundamental to insurgencies, but the fact that we couldn't cross the border, the only thing that we could do is basically just report everything we saw and found to our intelligence shop, and they in turn reported it up to some other folks, and eventually we started to see a series of CIA drone strikes in this area that did manage to mitigate the situation and really reduced the willingness of the Taliban to attack. But until that happened, they were really able to exploit it. And again, it would have been way easier for us to go into some of these areas in the Khyber Valley and actually clean things up, right? But the Taliban and insurgent groups like the Haqqani Network, they knew they could take advantage of this artificial boundary to cause tremendous angst for U.S. forces. And Russia, they're no different, right? They know that Western policymakers have said, listen, we'll give you weapons, but only to defend your sovereign territory. And the problem is that means that Russia can literally, you could have Putin himself standing over here, and Western policy says you can't hit him with a HIMARS, right? You can't just smoke the dude with a Western-made drone. And it's pretty frustrating if you're a Ukrainian, and it's right now extremely problematic, because what this means is that if you're a Russian soldier fighting in Vovchansk, your logistics hub, like a major fuel depot, a major repair center, is basically safe. It's safe from all Western weapons. Ukrainians have to use Soviet-era stocks, if they have any left, to hit them. And that's just so much less effective, but it makes it so much easier for Russia to operate in some of these towns. Now, I'm exaggerating. I don't think they're literally sitting on the border, but they could be. And they're much more forward deployed. They're much closer to the border, and they're much better able to support these efforts. And that means that these Russian light infantry forces are going to just be tougher at baseline. They're going to be, they're going to be able to get Kazovac to medical treatment faster. They're going to be able to get resupply faster. Their tanks are going to be able to get more ammunition faster. It's just a really tough situation. And it reflects a reality that the reason Ukrainians ask for HIMARS is because the further they stretch Russian logistics lines, the further back from the front the Russian logistics system has to locate itself, the harder a time the Russian forces have sustaining these kind of combat operations, right? And this new front kind of solves that. Now, the problem is going to, in some ways, solve itself, because as you may note, the deeper into Ukrainian territory they get, the more mitigated this advantage is. And so the worst case scenario still tilts the scales in Ukraine's favor, right? If Russia were to advance, then Ukraine would have a more rich target environment inside its own territory to take out Russian logistics support. So all that to say, though, even ISW is assessing that Vovchansk is the target, right? And the Russian forces going after bridges and water features to isolate the Ukrainian defenders in Vovchansk. But again, it's not clear that Vovchansk serves a larger operational purpose beyond simply pressuring Ukrainian forces. They may be aspiring to maybe pressure them along this line of contact here in kind of the Kupiansk region. We know that's somewhere Russia's been pushing to take for some time. But again, if Kharkiv is the objective, and as we've talked about on the live stream earlier, Kharkiv is based on Bakhmut and Avdiivka. Kharkiv would be a nightmarish fight for Russian forces, but it's not clear that there's another meaningful objective that Russia can achieve, even if they get their hands on Vovchansk. So anyway, guys, that's really all I had. Thank you to the Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. The Lieutenant tier members, I really could not do this without you guys. Tomorrow, we're going to take a look at all the footage from the fighting here on Combat Vet News. So check us out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.